the 3 proven pillars of security awareness success. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We understand that your time is valuable, so we plan on making a great impact in the little time that we do have. My name is Shannon Lane, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time today introducing Shearwater. Hopefully by now you know us well enough. More importantly, I'd like to talk about how we deliver. And we really deliver by focusing on providing great cybersecurity outcomes and delivering long-term value to you, our clients, and also to the cybersecurity industry more broadly. In terms of our agenda today, we'll be addressing the important role of IT and security leaders in building a security awareness culture, specifically how you can lead, engage, and change. Lead by mobilizing business executives and shareholders and stakeholders and aligning them behind the common goal of raising security awareness across the organization. Engage by winning hearts and minds of staff. And change by communicating success and building tactics to maintain the ground gained. Please feel free to send us any questions that you may have throughout the webinar. At the end of the presentation, we'll undertake a Q&A session and answer as many questions as we have time for. We'll also be sending out a short survey at the end of the webinar to help us build better webinars, so watch out for that later on. Our presenter today is Damien Grace. Damien is the creator and general manager of Friendly Phishing. He led the ethical hacking team at Shearwater Solutions for a number of years, where he saw the impact of phishing on organizations. Shearwater's Friendly Phishing training ecosystem that he created currently provides training for 250,000 users across Australia and New Zealand. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Damien.
Thank you, Shannon, and hello, everyone. Thank you for what's looking like actually a really great attendance. Just based on what I'm seeing and the amount of people that I'm seeing on here already, I think it goes to show how security awareness is really starting to become very important within organizations and really starting to get a much stronger uptake, which is fantastic. So why is it important? Why is security awareness such an important thing within organizations? Well, firstly, if you look at it, people have never been such the focus of cyber attacks as what they are right now. Cyber attacks have really started to ramp up across the board. And what that means is that your staff are either going to be your greatest risk or your greatest assets. And it's really important to understand that, and to understand that where once upon a time, the way that the attack vector happened was, either through a network penetration test or a web application penetration test, hack, has really changed. It's really changed the focus, really changed the way that they're trying to get into your organization or trying to get information out of your organization. So with this increase in attack vector, there's another area that's actually really important to note. So not only do you need to focus on how you can improve your staff engagement and how you can improve your staff's awareness, but it's not just for them at home, at work, it's actually for them at home as well. And this, as we go through, you'll see how important it is that they focus, like just to give you an example actually. So if you look at my grandfather, he got attacked from an online source over a number of years, and he ended up losing a couple of $100,000. He lost his house, he lost his wife, and then by the time he died, he actually had pretty much nothing on the back of that. And if you think about this type of thing, obviously for any one of your staff members, if this was to happen in their environment, that would have a great impact, but it also has a very, very strong potential to negatively impact the business and the organization on the back of that as well, just in terms of their engagement and how what they're thinking, where their life is at. So let's move into what we're going to be covering off today. So obviously now we've covered off why it's important, but now we're going to focus on the 3 key pillars that can allow you to create that change across your organization. By the end of this, what I'm really hoping to give you is a kind of a clear roadmap to link things together that really show you what it takes to lead your team or lead your leadership team, lead your staff engage them in a way that makes them actually want to be part of this and really start to want to be actually aware for security. And then also how you can create that long-lasting change. You know, it's one thing to do training, but most training is done as a short-term solution, whereas what you really want to create is very much a long-lasting change. So the first one is, how can you lead? And leading is actually very important. So what if I was to say to you that you could know before you even start what type of results you are going to see? So you could look at your organization. You probably have a gut feel of this actually. Just for a non-mandatory assessment, you know, how well is your organization going to perform? Not in terms of the results, but in terms of uptake. The stats on the board here are pretty much what we typically see. So you can have a sub 40% completion rate, which is really translates into how much they're engaging with the initiative. Then there's a section between sort of 55 and 70%, and then there's a greater than 80% completion rate. And we can typically, using one metric, one assessment, know where you're going to fall within that range. And what that comes down to is your culture. So what is the culture, the learning culture in particular, for your organization? What is your environment like for receiving and completing new training, and how do they enjoy it? So what is your learning culture? There are really three main types of learning cultures that we see from our experience. The first one is low interest. So a low interest learning culture, this is the type of organization where everyone in the organization really tries to push against the training. They really have no interest, they're too busy or they're too important, and they're very loud. They let you know very clearly that they aren't very interested in doing this training. This low interest culture, really, it's not the optimal place to be. It does make it very difficult to get your awareness initiatives across the line. The next one that we see is more of an indifferent culture. So an indifferent culture, they'll pretty much take it or leave it. You know, if they're given training, they'll do it. If they're not given training, they're quite happy to not do anything as well. They'll basically do what is expected of them. And by and large, you know, you can get decent results having this type of culture, but obviously it's not the optimal. It's not probably where you'd want to be trying to get to. And then the last one is the real highly engaged. This highly engaged culture, they're really open to new ideas. They're open to sharing and supporting each other. They hold each other accountable for their actions. And then you'll also hear strongly when they're doing the training, etc., how much they enjoy it, how much it's meant to them. And that is kind of the optimal. If you can get to this point where they're engaged, they're self-accountable, this makes it a dream in a lot of cases for you guys trying to get these people to do your training, how they engage with it, what they do afterwards, how they continue to use what they've learned. It can create a very different environment. And from our experience, from what we've seen, going into different types of cultures, different types of organizations, the difference is more than just seeing those completion rates. You know, a 40% completion rate versus an 80% completion rate, obviously it's a large difference across the organization and can create a large gap when it comes to risk. But just the enjoyment that people get out of it and the lack of stress that it has on people such as yourselves trying to get these initiatives across can be quite substantial. So how do you create a highly engaged culture? Well, with any cultural change, really it starts from the top. In most organizations, it's the upper management that create the culture or allow a culture to grow. And so what you want to do is really change, so really drive the change from this upper management. So to do that, the first thing you need to do is start to create an awareness. A lot of upper management, they're not technical people. They don't necessarily have a strong understanding of what this means. And it's important to drive that awareness, show them how the culture can dramatically affect the results you get, but also show them things like compliance or legislation or the mandatory data breach and things like this. What is their requirements? Make them very aware of what their requirements are around this. On top of that, you need to show them the impact. So it's one thing to be made aware, but they need to clearly understand what the impact could be on them. And you need to frame this in a way that makes sense to the business. You need to, if you look at it as action versus outcome, you need to make sure that you're focusing not on the action, but what the actual outcome is. So you can't just say, employees are going to click on suspicious links. You need to be able to turn that into a business metric. So what does that mean? It could be that the IT support staff are spending a lot more time on cleanups. Those cleanups then directly turn into an increase in budget of X amount. And then also you could take it to the next level of, well, what about something like a ransomware attack? A ransomware attack we have seen knock out businesses for multi-days, not just for one or two people, but the entire organization. We've seen them lose months worth of data. What's the impact of this? The CEO or the CEO fraud attacks, or the business email compromise attacks. What does this mean to a business? We've seen, again, from the consulting side of our business, we've seen organizations losing, $1 million, transferring $1 million across to an attacker. What's the impact of that? If you can start to turn these, raise the awareness and then show them what the impact will be on their bottom line, then you can start to get a much stronger buy-in from management. So once they understand that, you then need to make sure that you've got an agreement to move forward on a particular approach. Obviously, in this case, we're talking about awareness training, and what does that look like? Once you've got that agreement, it's really vital to get a commitment. And I'd recommend getting this commitment in writing too, because it's not necessarily going to be easy. It depends on where you are in your journey. If you've got a lower performing organization, getting that commitment, changing that culture is going to require that commitment. You're probably going to have people that aren't necessarily wanting to make this change. They might bypass you and go back to the CEO and say, hang on a second, I don't want to be doing this. And you need to have their commitment in writing to say, we're backing this. We need to make this change. It is important. It'll also help you when you're trying to frame your communication strategies as well, which we'll cover shortly, because it's vital to be able to use, the upper management to be able to communicate effectively to the business. It doesn't just stop at upper management though. There are other key stakeholders that you also need to bring into the mix. So first one is human resources. And so human resources, their ultimate job, their goal is to protect and to look after the people in your organization. And depending on the type of awareness that you're doing, they could have concerns. They might be concerned that people are doing too much training over a certain amount of time, or the training's going too long. They might have concerns that people are feeling tricked or inadequate or whatever it is. There is concerns there that you need to alleviate. So you definitely want to be bringing them into the discussion very early and alleviating those concerns as soon as possible. There's also the learning and development team. If you've got an organization that has a learning and development team, these people will have been running initiatives within the organization already, more than likely. And you don't want to be going in and saying, oh, by the way, we've got an awareness training starting tomorrow. Just thought you'd like to know. You know, this is not how, it's a good way to get them really offside and make them sort of push against the initiative very strongly. So getting them involved, allowing them to be part of the decision-making process and the selection, putting forward their selection criteria, all of this sort of thing, you'll get a much better result out of this as well. And then the other one that a lot of people tend to forget about is the service desk. Now, the service desk, where this really comes into its own is if you are doing phishing assessments. Any sort of phishing assessment like this, they are going to have a concern about the workload that will be potentially imparted onto them. When people are reporting phishing emails, they don't want to have to be running down, chasing down dead ends to find out that actually it was a phishing assessment. So someone, typically the manager of the area, needs to know about these assessments up front, to be told what they're going to be, what domains are going to be used, and making it very clear and very easy for them to be able to go, okay, that's one of the phishing assessments that we've got running, no problem, no action required. If you can alleviate their concerns, again, you know, actually across the board, if you can bring all of those people in, then it can make a dramatic difference to how quick and how easy you can implement a program and how effective it can be. So we're just going to, as we go through, we've got a few different polls that we want to run just to get a bit of an understanding across your organisation of where you're standing. So the first one here is, what type of learning culture does your organisation have? Do you have a low interest culture, an indifferent culture, or a highly engaged culture? Or are you just not sure? There's a poll up on the screen at the moment. Please feel free to put in your answer to this, and we'll give you a couple of seconds to fill this in, and then we'll be straight back. Okay, thank you everyone that filled in that poll. We'll run through these results at the end of the webinar as well. Okay, so now that you've been able to set up an effective leadership team, you've got your commitment from that leadership team as well. Everyone's now wanting to push forward. You now need to create that plan. You need to create a plan that engages people, that gets their buy-in, and that makes them want to really take part in this. And so how do you do that? What does that actually look like? Well, first thing is you need to make sure that whatever you create actually gets people engaged. You know, the old style of doing awareness training, which was, you know, here is some very technical information that I'm going to put out to people, and when I think of it, I just think of grey. You know, it's dull, it's boring, people go to sleep. This is not effective for creating good engagement, but it's not effective to creating good training. And so to make people engaged, you really need to present them with something that actually interests them. And also really focus on context. Most training out there does not put any context into it. You know, it's like the old saying, you know, don't click on links. That was the way that people were teaching how to stop phishing for the longest time. Don't click on links. And people go, hang on a second, why? They don't know why, they have no interest, so they just go and click on a link anyway because it's not engaging, they weren't engaged. So it's very important to put in components and structures that keep people engaged. You also want to make people actually enjoy the process, which is something that I think a lot of corporate training is really forgotten about. It's enjoyment is how you get people to actually want to take part. It's part of that engagement in a lot of ways. And then also in part of that is you want to make sure that people are actually getting wins. So think about the last corporate training you did. Did you come out of that feeling like you'd won? Or did you come out of it feeling like it was, you know, a fail? You know, did you come out of there going, "Wow, that was great. I actually enjoyed that. I got something out of that." This is very important to take people on that journey, to make them want to come along with you. You need to be giving them wins, not fails. And there's multiple touch points that you can do that across training, across phishing, across quizzes. There's a whole raft of different areas where you can give people wins. One of those areas is making sure that the training is not too technical. So if you look at, obviously most people in your organization are probably, in most organizations, they're non-technical people. To get people from being non-technical to being very technical, to technical enough to understand what they need to know, it's a journey. It takes time, it takes effort. And if you go in there and you slam them with something that's too technical, they just tune out. And so the ideal is, if you think about every person out there, they have their own unique comfort zone. Everybody's comfort zone is different. And what you want to do is you just want to push them just slightly, just nudge them out of that comfort zone. And if you can nudge them just out of that comfort zone for long enough, they will start to absorb that new learning, and it'll become part of their new expanded comfort zone. If you try to take them out of that zone too quickly, they push back, they reject it, they don't want to go forward. And so by slowly pulling them out of that comfort zone and allowing them the time to become comfortable with that, and then expand it again, and then by doing this over and over and over again, that is how you make that gradual change to the culture. As well as making sure that they are personally bought into it. So this comes down to what we were talking about before, about setting up the context, but don't just focus it on the business, focus it on how it's going to help them in their home life, for their families. Going back to my example of my grandfather before, this type of impact can create a big change in the way people are thinking if you can show them how it's going to help them for their family. And then ultimately, every part of this, everything that you should be driving towards, is creating long-lasting change. There is a very big difference between a short-lived change, which is 5 minutes worth of video once a year that's too hard, and they just go, wow, okay, I've done it, I'm not going to think about it again, to being able to build it in, to be able to grow and change the culture and have them, like I said before, bringing it into their comfort zone. Once you've done that, then it can become a long-lasting change. So now you know what you want it to look like. Now you need to map it out. You need to start to create a learning path. And when I say map it out, I mean literally map it out on a timeline. I would suggest it's a multi-year program that you'd like to put in place. You also then want to start to communicate that. You want to put in communication overlays with this as well. So you want to map out when you're going to do testing, when you're going to do training, when you're going to communicate to people. You want to set up a clear ongoing learning cadence, and this is especially important for that low interest style culture. A learning cadence, if they're not used to doing training, or if they push against the training, then you need to find a cadence where they know that every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever you choose, whatever suits your organization, they are going to get a learning cadence that they know is coming. And eventually, if you go back to the last lesson, if it's engaging, if it's fun, and they start to get more interest in it, you can slowly chip away at that cultural change and slowly start to push them or guide them, I should lead them into a better awareness state and more engaged state. Now, it's important to have that cadence like I just mentioned, but there's other areas that need to be randomized. So if you're going to be testing behavior, you don't want that to be a cadence. You don't want people to go, okay, I know that Monday, the first Monday of every month at 10 a.m., I'm going to get an assessment, whether it be phishing or a quiz or whatever. I know it's coming. I can prepare for it. I can be ready for it. If you're going to do behavioral testing, it needs to be randomized. People can't know when it's going to be, what it's going to be, and they just need to be sort of staying always on. Always ready. This is how you can start to get a much stronger and a much more effective, learning behavior. As part of that, it's also really important, and this is specifically for phishing. Phishing, obviously, this day and age, phishing is one of the biggest risk factors. And so I put this in here specifically because the way that you treat phishing in your assessments and in your training can sort of make or break your entire system. if you're going to go and use phishing, and like kind of the traditional model here is, let's send out really hard phishing emails to everyone, every year or every month or whatever, and they're really complex and they're really difficult and they're designed specifically just to trick people. And then they do it again and it tricks people, and they do it again, and they're not getting behavioral change. They're just tricking people. And if anything, it's going to push people against the initiative. So that's the way we look at that. That's a risk assessment. It's important to do a risk assessment. It's very valid to do risk assessment, but it's not going to drive behavioral change. What you need, as well as the risk assessment, is a way of providing phishing emails that are designed to be easier, that are designed to be seen, that are designed to allow people to learn and to grow and to build their confidence, give them those wins that we spoke about before. So there is a very clear differentiation between a risk assessment phishing email and a training phishing email, and that's a very important thing to understand. And then also, you need to have progress reporting. As you're going through, you need to be able to report on each stage and improve on each stage. And once that's built in, it needs to be built in from the start. You'll use that later on. Now, as you're doing this, going back to linking it all together, so you had your leadership team before, you still need to involve them as you're going through. You can't just go and do this in isolation. So keep your stakeholders up to date. They need to know not just on the planning rules, but also what's going on as you're rolling it out. Make sure that they're involved in this decision making. Come up with that plan, sure, and then go to them and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? How does this work? Listen to their comments as well. They're going to have certain concerns that are unique to each area within the organization. Listen to those concerns and find ways to appease them or to help them alleviate those concerns. And then also, if you're having trouble, if you want to find different ways to communicate to different areas of the stakeholder, if you want, essentially seek out experts that can help you with this. There are certain ways that you can frame your responses or do certain things that will alleviate their concerns. So talk to people that have sort of, paved that path before you. So here's a quick example of what a learning path can look like. So this example here is actually from our friendly phishing system. And what you can see there is you've got the baseline, which is that risk assessment phishing simulation. You've got campaigns, which are the training phishing emails that go out at on an ongoing sort of randomized but regular cadence. And then you've also got different training that people want to schedule. So you can see here across the course of a year, they've got multiple risk assessments set up, so annual risk assessments for all staff. They start off sending out people the basic or the fundamental training. Then they move into those ongoing campaigns. But it also leaves room to schedule in other components, other types of training, whether it's general security awareness training or your compliance training or whatever else is going on within your organization. It's important to build that into this entire map. As well as that, putting in your other communication points. When are you going to talk to people about this? When are you going to communicate to them? What are you going to communicate about? What sort of posters and videos you're going to put in place? Are you going to do screensavers? Are you going to put videos up around the organization? There's a whole raft of different components that you want to overlay onto this, and then obviously record the results as you go along. So we're just going to move now into the second poll question. So what best describes your security awareness initiatives? Would you say that they're ad hoc training initiatives to satisfy compliance? Do you have ongoing computer-based training? Or do you have no real security awareness training in place at all at the moment? We'll just give you a couple of seconds to fill that out and we'll be back shortly. Okay, thanks again for filling that out. And again, we'll go through those the responses with you at the end of the webinar. Okay, so now we've talked about how you can get your leadership team on board, get their buy-in and get their commitment. We've also now created a plan for, getting that engagement, getting people involved. Now, how do we make sure that we can really create that cultural change within the organization? And this is where we go into that continuous improvement. So what that looks like is, firstly, you want to be able to repeat. You want something that you can repeat continuously to create that cultural change across the organization. You want to be able to repair any weaker areas. Now, that could be on an individual basis, or it could be a particular area of risk that you've identified as being weak, whatever that is. And then you want to be able to report back to stakeholders, get more, get clear on if it's working or if it's failing, and tweak the results, etc. So to dig into that a little bit deeper, so the first one is repeating. So for all of your staff, if they're coming from an area where they're not necessarily, I mean, most people are not too aware when they're coming into this. This is why you're giving them the training in the first place. And to take them from that level up to being, quite aware and very capable, it's a journey. It takes time. It requires time and effort to get them up to that point. And so with that, you want to give them gradual ability to improve and to increase that comfort zone that they've got. So on that journey, you want to be able to go, okay, I'm going to map that out and say, this is what they're going to do at this time, and this is how it's going to affect them, and slowly build them up over time, gradually and systematically, to take them out of their comfort zone and create a very strong level of growth on a long-term, ongoing basis. And it should be a continual process. After you've gone through that, we then focus on what can we do to highlight the areas, the highest areas of risk, or the areas of the organization that require improvement. So it could be something from a phishing assessment, for example, where you've gone, okay, over the course of X months, I can see that I've got 10 or 20 or 50 people here that I think are probably the highest risk people in the organization. Maybe we go and do a lunch and learn, or have a webinar specifically for them, or maybe it takes a face-to-face session. There's a whole raft of different things that you can do here, and you do it specifically for those people. Or you might go, okay, I think that tailgating has proven through quizzes, etc. I can see, or from visual, from seeing around the organization, tailgating is an area of risk that we need to really focus on now. And so again, you could do it in the same sort of way, lunch and learns or webinars, or you could actually just have a dedicated training session specifically for this. By identifying the weak areas of your organization and focusing on them specifically, it allows you to improve that risk profile for that section or for that area. And then by doing that and then focusing on the next level of risk, or the next high risk area, over time you can slowly build up that bottom layer. The lowest point of risk becomes higher and higher and higher, and you can ultimately completely change your risk profile across the board. And then lastly is around reporting. Reporting, if you're not reporting, if you're not clear on what you're doing well and what you're not doing so well, it's very hard to improve. So if you can have clear metrics, clear understanding, it allows you then to report back to the leadership team. It allows you to show a clear return on investment, ROI, to say, look, this is what we're doing, this is how it's improving. And by getting stronger buy-in, stronger commitment with proof, it allows you then to completely iterate the culture that you've got, improve it in a much stronger way from the top down, which is really the best way you can possibly do it. Okay, just our last poll for the webinar. How do you currently report on security awareness initiatives? Do you do this regularly and according to preset intervals? Do you do it when you're asked by upper management? Are you not able to report on current security awareness initiatives, or do you have no security awareness training in place at all? Okay, thank you everyone. So just to wrap this up, like I said before, everything about this is a journey. If you have a high-performing team at the moment, a high-performing organization, learning culture, then fantastic. You're a long way along this journey. If you're only just starting out, then yeah, you've got some time to go. But it's really important to understand where you are right now and where ultimately, oops, wrong one, where do you want to be? So if you look at the way that, what we've just moved through, if you really want to move the dial, if you want to go from having engaged or not engaged people to having really engaged people, to having a very successful learning environment, if you want to take people through that journey, you really need to engage at that leadership level to start off with. Once you've engaged at that leadership level, you want to make sure that your plan is highly engaging and highly motivating for your people within the organization. And then you want to make sure that the change that you're enacting is ongoing and continually challenging at just the right pace to get people to really make that change. So my challenge to you is really go out there, make that plan, work out what you want it to look like, how it's going to work, and then take action. And then if you do want some help with this, if you do want to talk and to run things by people, or if you want some help across the board, please reach out. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis, and we'd be more than willing to help you out with this. So with that, thank you very much for coming along today. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to hand back to Shannon now, and we'll go through some Q&A and also some of those poll results as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Damien. That was certainly a very insightful presentation, and it really does highlight the need to build a culture of security as well as a culture of learning within an organisation. So that was most helpful. Let's quickly jump into the Q&A part of the webinar and tackle the questions you've submitted to us so far. So first question I've got is that if I have, that's a really good one actually, if I have a low interest security culture or a low interest training culture, are there any quick tips to help build interest?
Yeah, so I mean, it's like if you're trying to do anything, that first stage, getting that initial momentum is probably the hardest component. It's like pushing a big rock. Once you start to get it rolling, then it can become easier. I think that really what it comes down to is small, bite-sized chunks with really strong context. Let people know what it's going to, why it's important to them. What we find is a lot of the time, if people are pushing back against an initiative, it's because they have no real interest in it. By showing them context, by allowing them to see how it impacts them on a personal level, not a corporate level, but them for themselves on a pretty much a selfish level, really is the way you want to focus this. By doing that, you can really change, start to get their buy-in, and then over time, you'll make a big difference.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Damien. Second question, how important is it to tailor training to suit different audiences, e.g. the C-suite versus office workers or field workers who don't log in that often?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say it depends. It depends on what the training is. If we're talking something sort of more general, like fundamentals that can apply to everyone, then that there can go across everyone, no problem. But then there's specific areas of risk within the organization or specific types of business speak and things like that, where it can definitely help to have a more tailored solution. If we're talking business email compromise, for example, business email compromise can be focused really clearly on finance people or the C-level or areas that it's going to affect more often. Also, in saying that, if you're talking C-level, they're going to need a different level of understanding. It's similar to what we discussed up front with the awareness piece as well, and what the impact is. Doing some dedicated C-level webinars or face-to-face sessions up front can really help drive that change and get that commitment and that agreement as well.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other sort of observations is that you do get various levels of engagement within the C-suite. They want to understand both what they need to know and also what their staff and their people need to know. So, you do have to segment that audience as well. So
absolutely.
Any other questions at this stage? If you do have them, please yell out. We've only had the couple so far. If we don't have any more, we might jump into the poll results very quickly. And if you do have any more questions, please keep them coming and we'll address them after those poll results. So let's jump to the poll results so far. So in the answer to the first poll question, what type of learning culture does your organisation have? We've got 4% with no interest or no culture. 62% is indifferent, and 27% is highly engaged. That's actually a really, really good result, to be honest. That's a fantastic result. I was predicting a little bit more in the indifferent phase, to be honest.
Yeah.
And there's 8% who aren't sure, so maybe that's a good question to start off with.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. If you look at the non-engaged group, we do see that that's actually quite a small percentage, which is fantastic because it is a tougher area to be starting from, without a doubt.
Okay, dokes. Maybe on to the second poll question. We have got another question that's come through, so we'll address that in a moment. What best describes your security awareness initiatives? 32% of you said they're ad hoc training initiatives to satisfy compliance. 46% have ongoing CBT training in place, which is quite a solid number. And 21% of you have no security awareness training in place at the moment. So hopefully today's inspired you to go out and think about what you need to achieve there. And the last poll result, how do you currently report on security awareness initiatives? 31% regularly report on a preset interval, which is great. 38% when asked by management. 23% are currently not able to report on current security awareness initiatives, and 8% have no security awareness initiatives in place at the moment. So again, there's probably broken down into roughly thirds each on those three questions. So that's interesting. Alrighty, we'll pop into the couple of questions that have just come through. Okay, so we had initial interest in the awareness training, and then it became a hassle. Sorry, a hassle. How do we renew that initial interest?
Yeah, so I guess the first question is, why did it become a hassle? Was there too much training? Was it too long? Was it not engaging enough? You need to understand, I guess, why. And then once you understand why, if you go back to what creates an effective training system, start to go through each one of those items and work out if there's any of those that you can implement that will sort of kickstart their interest again. It's definitely not impossible. Focusing it again on how it can help them, making it lively, making it interesting, and maybe even a short session or something like this could definitely help as well.
And look, the last question I think is an absolute cracker. I wish we'd actually asked this one ourselves, but it's a great question. Training clearly has value, but is there any quantifiable evidence to support that raising awareness reduces risks? This is particularly a comment around the detractors might ask this question in particular. So great question.
Yep. So look, first of all, we never tout training as being, the silver bullet. It's not going to fix everything, without a doubt. Training needs to go into, a responsible security awareness layered plan. You need to have things like firewalls, for example, but we know you can bypass them. You need to have things like antivirus, which we know we can bypass, but it all together works as a whole. And really, that's kind of the way we pitch it. We can see as well from our statistics and information, we can see how many people have done the training versus how many people are clicking on phishing emails, that sort of thing. Some areas of training are harder to pull out quantifiable evidence, but just ultimately, from our experience in penetration testing and security as a whole, we know we can get into organizations through tailgating. We know we can get into organizations with phishing emails, like all of these different ways we know we can get in, but then we can see clearly You know, if we're getting into an organization through tailgating and they've got a strong culture of understanding, you know, or questioning, which has come through training, questioning strange people, we absolutely get called out on it, you know, as part of our testing. So there's some quantifiable evidence, yes, and there's also some sort of anecdotal evidence that we've got from experience as well that shows that it can definitely make an improvement. But again, it's not the silver bullet.
And I think, you know, more to that point, within the friendly phishing ecosystem, there are some quantifiable statistics. If you are able to extrapolate from that, you know, the likelihood of an incident being initiated through a phishing email, you can actually draw some evidence from that in terms of the cost reduction and consequently the risk reduction you can achieve through an aware and engaged workforce. Okay, dokes. Well, it looks like that is the end of the questions. If you do have any separate ones that you'd like to ask offline, then please feel free to do so. That's pretty much a wrap for our Q&A session. Thanks for those questions. There were a couple of really good ones in there. So in closing, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today. Please do complete that survey for us at the end of this session. What you provide will help us define topics that you'd like to cover for next time, and we'll definitely address those requests. Everyone will receive a copy of the recording via email, and there will be a posting of the session today as well, or at some stage within the next few days on our website. It looks like Mikhail has already published the presentation, so that's good to go. Thanks again, and look, have a cyber safe day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.